Let's wait for the streaming to start. It will take like 1 minute or 30 seconds to start the streaming. I'm going to refresh the streaming, and I think we are live. Let me see. I think we're live. Let me check again. Not yet. Uh, good, good. I think we are live in like some second. Good. We are live. Okay. Hello everyone. My name is Alan Ferrandis, co-founder of Core Analytica, and today I have the pleasure to be with Christopher Ching. Christopher is a communication coach for tech professionals. Personally, I have been checking all his materials, his YouTube videos, and I think they are phenomenal. And he specializes in uh, not only the communication part of analytics, but also mainly in communication, how communication can create an impact in, especially in tech professionals. Thanks a lot for being here, Christopher. How are you? Okay, let's start. Let's start first with something about you. I mean, I saw you're very popular on LinkedIn. Okay, many people actually is tagging you in the last 6 months. Okay, actually congratulating you for your material, for your videos, and actually for all what you're doing for the tech community related to communication analytics. So tell me something about you, how you start this, how did you start this communication part? But because I understand you were data analyst, you were in data visualization before, right? Good, good, good. Uh, let me just 1 second because I think there is not sound in your part. Let me just 1 second, Christopher. Okay, just 1 minute. I'm going to um I'm going to let me see. Okay, okay. Please, if any people there, we can hear Christopher. Okay, we are live streaming, so
Okay.
there must be some
Yeah.
technical problem. Okay, please, people tell me, I'm asking people if, to confirm if they can hear you. Please, can anybody in the audience tell me if you're hearing Christopher audio? And I think we can hear you. Just a second.
Okay.
Uh, Good. I think we can hear you. Good. Okay, let's continue. We need to be sorry for this
Yeah.
technical
No, no worries at
problem.
all.
Okay, so today we are going. The topic of today's webinar is actually communication in the analytics part. So what do you think? Let's start with the foundations of communications regarding related to analytics. What do you think are the key components of communications regarding data analytics?
I believe that the foundation in communication when it comes to data analytics really comes down to a switch in mindset. For a lot of us as data professionals, we like thinking at a very granular level, a very low level. We think about code, numbers, computers,
Yes,
how to make sure that all of our processes are precise. But at the end of the day, that's not what our end users and stakeholders care about. What they care about is the outcome of all of that.
yes, of course.
And in order to communicate, what we really need to do is start thinking in terms of our audience's shoes and what they want to hear. I was having a conversation with a client the other day where I asked her to present to me her project. And she told me about the features she was working with, the algorithm that she used, the metrics that she had chosen for evaluation. And at the end of that, I said, if I was a stakeholder, how could I use that information to make any decisions or decide on any action? And she said she realized all of the information she gave me was not usable by a stakeholder because it was all about what she did, not necessarily about why it matters to me and what I can do about it. And I think that's one of the fundamental things that needs to change when it comes to data communication is not thinking about how I accomplish something, but why it matters to my audience and what action they can take based on.
I mean, I'm going to double click in that response because that's
Yeah.
interesting. Most of that, most of us in data professionals actually we have to struggle with that technical difficulties, and that's why we focus too much on the technical part. And as you mentioned, precisely, we forget about that communication, that client part, because we are like thinking 24/7. Okay, how this technical part I'm going to use this language. Okay, so how do we data professionals, okay, um, need to address that part, that communication part? You mentioned something important, which is thinking of the client, thinking of the client needs. What other regarding that specific part? What other tip, what other advice could you give to data professionals? First, thinking of the client needs. What other tips could you give to data professionals regarding that part?
I would recommend diving even deeper into that aspect, not just knowing who your audience is, but really understanding them, doing your research about them. For example, if you've done a data analysis and you want to present it to your stakeholders, you must have a different presentation if you're presenting to people from marketing, or if you're presenting to people from finance, or from people from sales. You have to tailor your presentation to them by doing your research about what they care about. What metrics, what KPIs does marketing care about? What metrics and KPIs does finance care about? Make sure that your presentation of the data focuses on those things, not just a generic description of what you've done. If you've done your research on your audience, really studied them, studied the past work they've looked at, research what things they really care about in your organization, then you can make sure your presentations are impactful.
Good, good. Now let's talk about the challenges in data communication. We were talking with Christopher before the streaming start that I also specialize in communication, in data communication, in analytics. And something that I always notice is that communication is that like least developed skill. So, regarding the challenges you see in data communication in data professionals, you talk to a lot of data professionals. Okay, what specific challenges do you think data professionals often face when communicating the results, the findings in data to non-technical audiences?
One of the major difficulties and challenges that I see is excessive complexity. As we talked about just before, we really like getting nitty gritty, dealing with all the bugs in our code, and really making sure everything that we do is precise. We like including a lot of detail because we need to make sure our processes are reproducible and accurate. But there's a big difference, and I know you resonate with this a lot, between exploratory versus explanatory analysis.
Yeah.
When we're exploring the data ourselves and trying to figure out what's going on, it's fine to have a lot of complexity because we're trying to understand what the meaning is, what the trends are. But when comes time to explain that analysis to somebody else, that's when you have to reduce the complexity to something simple. The whole purpose of a presentation is to make it easy for someone to understand what's going on. So they don't have to struggle just as much as we did to figure it out. And the key to that is really making our slides and our visualizations simple, keeping it short and simple. For example, if I was working with a client and he had a presentation involving a dual axis chart, two y-axes, two variables simultaneously. That might be fine for a technical audience, familiar with that kind of chart and that data. But for a non-technical audience, what I found is dual axis charts can often be very confusing because you have to process two things going on simultaneously, a lot of crisscrossing lines. And what I recommended to my client was make sure, if your audience is non-technical, to make the chart more simple. Don't have two things going on simultaneously. Make sure whatever insight you want to convey, they can understand it very quickly within, let's say, 5 seconds. That's the key to making sure it resonates with your stakeholders.
But what other challenge mean? Making this communication even more simpler in the explanatory part. You mentioned it. The exploratory is very technical. The explanatory part is more like business related, client centric. Okay, first is like to make the data presentation simpler. What other tip could you give? What other challenges do you see that these data professionals often face when communicating to non-technical audiences?
One of the other challenges that I find happens most frequently is lack of narrative and story. And what I mean by that is not necessarily like a personal anecdote. I went to the supermarket on Sunday and I got some groceries, but story structure. And story structure, when incorporated into business presentations, can really make them effective. And what I mean by story structure is what's going on, why does it matter, what do we do next? What, so what, now what? That's a classic structure used to create these business presentations because, to the earlier points that we talked about, we're not just talking about what we did, but why it matters to the people we're talking to and what action they need to take next. What I see often happen in data presentations is we just list a lot of facts that we find interesting, but it's the organization of those facts into a structure, a story structure, that makes people interested in it and willing to engage with it.
There's I heard many of the interviews where you mentioned that um, that structure. I mean, what, so what, now what? I mean, for being honest, I also teach that structure for actually creating stories that lead to an action. Because in the now what part, that people take action to solve a problem. Okay, but something funny I'm going to tell you is that I don't remember where I read it, but I think I heard it to some specialist. Okay, and I just saw that first time I saw that structure for the story. Oh, it was really phenomenal. It's awesome, but I don't remember the name. Where do you remember you see that that the structure, the what, so what, now what?
To be honest, I don't also remember where I found it, but when I saw it for the first time, like you, I thought it was phenomenal. But I do not remember exactly what source.
it, it is the
It's
same. I mean,
yeah.
it is awesome. I mean, because it gives you framework to
Mm.
create stories. Okay, I also heard that you mentioned that, and I just remember that I wanted to ask you where you I cannot find like proper documentation for that structure. I don't even know how to name it. Okay, I mean
Right.
I think someone named it like the analytic cycle because analytics
Mm.
should be based on that structure. Like if you're a data analyst, there should be like a what you found in data. So why this data? So what is the part that is interesting for me in this data? And now what action should we done or what solution can we create or co-create? Okay, I really don't remember where I saw that. This is interesting framework. Okay, um, the data professionals all usually deal with intricate technical details. Okay, so we need to communicate. How can we communicate? How we data professionals can communicate without oversimplifying? To make you mentioned to make the technical details simpler. Okay, but how can we avoid the other extreme, which is over communicating? Oh, sorry, over simplifying in the
Right.
communication.
Right. As with anything, there can be an extreme we can take it. Too simple, and we don't have enough nuance. Too complicated, people get confused. The way to achieve a happy medium between them that I found works is to make sure that your presentation is always governed by just one main idea. And I say that because when we attend presentations, ultimately, there's only really one thing that we remember from them. It could be one main takeaway, one major sentence that someone has repeated a lot, but it's really only one thing. I was working with a client and he wanted to include a lot of information in his presentation. He wanted to talk about SEO, JavaScript, marketing, all these different facets.
Mhm.
And I said, there's a lot of great information here, but people will not remember all of it unless you connect it all to one main idea, just one takeaway that you bring everything underneath. Then, if you repeat that throughout the presentation and show those connections, people understand that overarching why, and everything becomes more clear. In that way, if you make sure everything in your presentation connects to that one main idea that overarches it, you make sure you have just enough technical detail to support it, to help people understand it, and not so much that it confuses and overwhelms them.
So the use of one main idea to actually make we should simplify it with not using fewer details, but using one main idea. I read something similar to an awesome book, a book I love called "It's Written with Data" by Colnus Baumer. She mentioned something like a big idea you have to remember or you have to communicate when communicating, when trying to do an effective communication. Okay, so most of the time, or many times, data professionals need to present data in a live presentation. Okay, so how can we data professionals can maintain the interest, the attention of the audience? Okay, in a live presentation, what tips you coach to your clients? Okay, when doing live presentation, when you have actually the actual people, the actual audience there looking at you, and you have to try to maintain the interest. Okay, and also not being boring. For example, what tips you? How do you coach your clients to do that?
I would recommend something that may sound counterintuitive and may seem unfamiliar, but is what I found is the best way to make sure you have audience engagement. And that would be, in addition to planning what you're going to say, also plan for moments where you engage the audience. So in addition to the outline of main points you want to talk about, make sure you plan for specific moments where you want the audience to be engaged. And that engagement can be a poll that you have people fill out. If this is a virtual setting, for example, there are tons of tools that let people do quizzes. Or it could be, if you're in a live setting, raise of hand kind of questions. How many people believe this? How many people believe this? Or if you're not as comfortable with those kind of live interactions, one of the best ways to simply incorporate audience engagement is pausing more frequently for questions. Most of the time, we have Q&A at the very end of the presentation.
Yeah,
And I usually don't recommend that approach because by the time we get to the very end, people will have forgotten the questions they want to ask. They're no
yeah,
longer relevant anymore.
that happens.
Right. And the Q&A can often feel like the slowest and least memorable part of the presentation. We want to end the audience experience on a high note, not just this long drawn out section where people are asking questions and answering them. So my recommendation to increase audience engagement is divide your presentation up into key sections. After each section, pause, summarize everything that you've said, and then ask the audience if there are any questions. Have that be a break.
uh,
And in
Split the
that way,
presentation.
yeah,
Split the presentation. Yeah.
throughout the presentation, having those moments throughout, splitting it up, to give the audience a break to process what you've said, and then give them an opportunity to ask you to clarify.
Good. That's. I mean, I usually do that in my classes, and yes, I mean, I don't remember having done that in presentation. I will do it in the future. Okay, what other tip could you give, especially in live presentations, because it's like it's challenging to have. I mean, people is trying, the digital profession is trying to remember what he has to say, and at the same time, is trying to keep the audience interested. So, what other tip can you give me? Splitting the presentation is one tip. What other tip can you give? Can you recommend?
The most important tip of all, and this is more important than the presentation itself, I would say, when you deliver it, is rehearsing for it. So I would recommend, if you have an important presentation coming up, or some kind of important meeting coming up, before that day, several days before that day, start rehearsing. Rehearse everything that you want to say, not as a script that you're reading word for word that you get stuck on, but rehearsing through the main points. Create an outline for yourself. These are all the main points I want to say, all the main cues. These are the points I want to engage the audience, and rehearse through that continuously. Watch yourself back on those recordings. Then you can see areas where you can improve for the next version of the recording. What often happens in presentations, especially in the workplace, is we don't rehearse for them. We create the slides and then we think, oh, I can just do it on the day of. I don't have to practice it. But practice is the most important part. I would say most of the effort involved in creating a presentation is before it actually begins. Then, when you know everything you want to say by heart, no questions asked, you can walk into the presentation and just focus on being present for the audience and interacting with them.
This is something I heard before. I think you mentioned it as well. Okay, and someone some years ago I heard something about they were comparing comedy with communication. For example, a
Yeah.
comedian and stand-up comedian, they rehearse their jokes, okay, and they and stand-up comedy is, I mean, it's like a half an hour, 45 minutes, but they rehearse like months or years to create this presentation, and they actually test the jokes, okay, and if people don't like that, they just remove the joke, and they start like testing. So I heard that somebody said in an interview about data education something like similar. If a comedian, okay, actually tests the presentation to see the impact of the joke on the audience, okay, presenter, I mean, business professional, data professional, why do not a professional, data professional, data professional, wouldn't do the same? Rehearse the impact of the audience of something he or she will say in the audience, or at least try to rehearse to see if it sounds good or if it's appropriate for the environment or the communication. Good. Okay, what other tip could you give me? First is splitting presentations. Second is rehearsing before the presentation. What other tips for live presentations?
The other tip I would give comes down to the mindset you have when you go into the presentation. A lot of us feel really nervous when we go into a presentation,
Yes.
and that can make us mess up everything. And what I recommend in those situations is really changing the way that we think about what a presentation is. A presentation is an opportunity for us to share important insights with our audience. In this webinar we're doing right now, it's an opportunity for us to share insights with our audience.
Yes.
And no one in our audience wants us to fail at that. They all want us to do a great job. We need to embrace that mindset instead of thinking to yourselves, oh, I'm going to mess up. Nobody's going to like it. Everybody wants to like what you're going to do. They're here because they trust you and your expertise. So the
Yes.
most important thing to do is to remember the only person in the room that doesn't believe that you're going to do a good job is yourself. And you need to change that voice in your head to become your biggest fan instead, your biggest supporter. The other advice that I would give is to remember that if you make a mistake, which we all inevitably do, it's okay. People are not going to notice it as much as you. And this happens often in, let's say, conversations. Let's say we make a mistake and we regret saying something. Most of the time, people won't notice if you don't point it out. The only person who notices is ourselves because we focus so much on our own actions. So it's important to remember anything that we do, if we make a mistake, just move forward purposefully. Don't dwell on that moment. And the last tip that I usually like giving is to make sure that you reinterpret the feelings that your body is telling you. Before a big presentation, we feel a lot of energy within ourselves, a lot of anxious energy, let's say. But that's just because we interpret it as anxious energy. We interpret it as nervousness, that our body is preparing us to run away from something that we are scared of, the flight response. But a different way to interpret the same sensation is our body is preparing us for a challenging situation and we're excited to approach it. So the same sensation in our body, the same fact can be interpreted as two different feelings depending on what story we choose to tell ourselves. If we choose the path of the flight response, wanting to run away, we're going to feel bad the whole time we give the presentation. But if we embrace the fact that we're actually excited about this opportunity, we want to do a good job, then we can approach that same situation with confidence.
Good. Live presentation is something that someone said once that how do you learn how to present, how to speak to an audience? And someone once said, okay, you learn how to speak to an audience by speaking to an audience. It's just a matter of practice. So you need to do it. There is no other way. You cannot learn how to swim in a book. You have to swim. That's important what you say. Okay, so let's go to talk about learning, um, learning and techniques in data storytelling and communication. So talking about the storytelling, what is storytelling techniques do you find the most effective while when presenting data-driven insights? I mean, the what, so what, now what is one storytelling technique, for example. Whether it's storytelling technique when you want to assemble, structure one story, or you want to give a presentation in as an story. What tips, techniques do you recommend to deliver content, your communication as a story?
I would say that there has to often be a switch in the usual way we tell stories if we're speaking to certain kinds of audiences. For stakeholders and people who we want to give all of the context, talk about the so what and the now what, like stakeholders, the story structure works. We take them along on the journey. By the end, we've persuaded them to do something. But sometimes we have to change that structure if our audience is executives, for example. For executives, we often have to take the reverse approach. We often have to talk about now what, so what. And the
What?
reason for that is and the reason for that is because executives are often very short on time. And all they want to know at the very beginning is what decisions do they need to make. Because audiences in our meetings, they often have to leave early. They often
Yes.
have to not stay for the entire presentation. If you take too long to get to the main point, they might have already left by then or already have tuned out. Being very busy people, for executives, we often have to reverse the story structure to talk about what is the action we want you to decide on first, then provide supporting information for that, the so what, why does this matter, and finally, the context, what's going on. This is called a pyramid structure, and it's used often in newspapers. They give the headline first, what's the big idea, then they give in the article itself supporting information, and finally a little more background detail. You can imagine it as that pyramid dwindling down and down. And that works for executives because they need to make decisions, important decisions, and they need to know exactly what the point is very early on in the presentation.
Cute. What you say is I mean makes a lot of sense because, for example, when you have a YouTube video, you have in the right at the beginning of the video, like one 5 second part of the video that is like interesting, so it
Right.
gets your attention. So the same will be applied for communication in an environment where you have like a decision maker with very little time to hear you. So like they have limited time. So like reverse the start with the action. Start with a big action or the headline, and then go deep in the details. Good. What are apart from reversing the starting with the headlines with the big idea, for example? whether storytelling technique, or for example, or technique for business audiences, executive audiences, for example, to deliver true stories, for example.
Another example of a technique is, and this is what I often recommend for even short form communication. In short form communication, what often happens is we want to make sure we say things in a concise way so people just get our point. Let's say we're talking for someone just casually like this. We want to make sure that the points we deliver are delivered efficiently. I often recommend frameworks like situation, complication, resolution for those purposes. If you organize your ideas in those 3 steps, just one sentence, let's say, for each, that makes sure your ideas are organized very concisely. So I talk about a situation, what's going on, this is what's going on with the organization. The complication, what's the issue that needs to be resolved? And then resolution is how do we resolve that issue? You can think of that 3 sentences that I say to you right now, or you could think of that in large scale for a presentation. Situation at the beginning, a section talking about historical context for our data. Complication, what's the big issue that we're trying to solve? What's preventing us from achieving the KPIs that we want, our targets? And finally, what's the resolution? What action do we need to take in order to achieve that? So situation, complication, resolution is a technique often used in marketing. And the reason for that is because the complication in the middle makes people anxious and frustrated about the problem. And then you finally, at the end, show them how to resolve that problem.
Yeah, it's like very similar to the what, so what, now what, but yeah,
Exactly.
it's a different, it's a
Mm-hmm.
structure for creating stories. Good. Now we're talking about communication. We're talking about communication. Let's see if we want to learn. Okay, what resources for learning for acquiring new knowledge techniques do you recommend? Like books, videos, or maybe follow some expert online?
The book you mentioned is one that's always at the top of my list, Storytelling with Data by Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflic. That was actually the first book that I read entering into the field.
Me too.
And it inspired me to pursue data visualization. It made it so compelling, so interesting. And I used to do data visualization very differently before reading that book. My charts were very colorful. I had a lot of things going on in my dashboards because I thought it had to be visually impressive. But Cole's book, Storytelling with Data, taught me you have to be simple with your insights. This is business after all. This is not modern art or a museum where you have to make colorful visual media, but you have to make things simple and concise for our business audiences. And the key to that is making sure you minimize color, you make sure that there's a clear title on your visualizations, you minimize noise with all the grid lines, things of that nature. So Cole's book is always on the top of my list because it's one of my favorites. The other I would recommend is by Brent Dykes, who's also a fantastic data storytelling mentor and trainer on LinkedIn and other platforms. And his book is Effective Data Storytelling. It goes into a lot more of the narrative structures around how to create a good presentation as well.
Can,
So
can you can you repeat the name of the author?
yeah, Brent, Brent, and then his last name is Dykes, Dykes.
Good. And I don't know that book. I will read. I will buy it. Awesome. And what other books or resources or videos you also recommend?
So those two would be at the top of my list. If people are interested in some more of the content that I write, I have compiled a 140 page around guide to data storytelling and presentation that's available on my website, thehiddenspeaker.com. And in that book, what I've done is I've combined video tutorials that I have on my YouTube channel, complemented with documents and examples explaining a lot of these concepts that we're talking about today. So how to organize a good presentation, how to organize a presentation to executives in particular, how to design dashboards and present them in a way that's compelling for stakeholders, and a lot of the techniques about communication. So how do you make sure your communication is concise, how to overcome a lot of anxieties around confidence, and how to make sure that slides and data visualizations are effective. So all of that is material that I cover in my resources as well.
Yes, Nina, talking about learning resources, I was going to ask you about that. You are a coach for tech professionals. So, what will a tech professional will need to do to have coaching sessions or classes with you to be trained by you? What are the resources you offer? I mean, you have a ebook. Do you offer like one-on-one coaching sessions, or how do you help data professionals in this field?
Right. So I have my LinkedIn account where I share weekday tips about data presentation and storytelling.
Very popular
And
LinkedIn
thank you.
account.
And I have my website, thehidden-speaker.com, where I go into a little more detail about three options that I usually give for tech professionals. One is one-on-one coaching. This is the option I like the best because I get to work with people individually on their specific goals, and we have sessions where we work on those specific goals in a tailored and personalized way. Every person gets a different kind of lesson plan. And the other option that I have is my new online course that starts next week on September 14th. And you can find that at thehidden-speaker.com/academy. That's where I have every week, we learn a new lesson in my curriculum around data presentation and storytelling. And every week there's a 30-minute time commitment, just 30 minutes, because everybody has a busy schedule, to record yourself presenting. And so to exactly what we were talking about earlier in the session, one of the best ways to improve when it comes to presenting is to present and to speak. And the best way to evaluate yourself and get feedback is by recording yourself. So I have everyone in the community record themselves on video, applying the lesson that is from that week. And in addition to that, I have live events in the community so we can all practice together. And as a community setting, we all support each other in that learning environment. The last option that I have, number 3, is workshops for companies. So I help companies and their teams holding half-day, full-day workshops, applying these skills tailored to their specific way of designing dashboards, using examples from their material, and showing them how to make them even more impactful.
Good. You also have a YouTube channel, which
Yes,
is very
exactly.
interesting. Actually, I've been checking. If you, if people Google Christopher Chin, you will see like many interviews. Okay, but one place where you compile all these little tips, okay, in very short videos, are your YouTube channel. So, what is your YouTube channel?
So my YouTube channel, the handle is The Hidden Speaker. And yeah, it's one of my favorite places to post my content. I really enjoy making videos. And I always try to make them short and digestible because I really believe there's no need for the video to go on too long when I can get to the point as quickly as I can and give someone an actionable tip, let's say every day, that they can apply in their everyday life. And so, yeah, the channel is The Hidden Speaker.
Good, good. Okay, so let's talk about we are reaching the end of the webinar. The future of data communication. Okay, not only data communication by itself, but why in the near future we data professionals that historically we were like certified in tools in hard skills. Why do we need to pay attention now and in the future to this soft skill as communication? This skill actually is not that soft; it's actually an important skill as communication. What do you think is the future of data communication, or why will a data professional need to understand and be trained in this skill?
I believe that with the advances in AI that have been happening so recently and quickly, that it will become incredibly important for every professional in every industry to work on these skills. AI, there was this fear that AI would take all of our jobs at one point because it can do what we can do. It can write SQL code, it can write any kind of code, it can write documentation, it can do everything. And right now, it's not at the point where it's going to replace all of our jobs because it's what I believe is that really it's an enhancement for us. If you know how to use it well, you can use it to make your processes more efficient, to automate things. But as time goes on and AI becomes more sophisticated, we really will realize how important communication is, that businesses, especially data-oriented businesses, are not technology-driven. They're people-driven. Every business is people-driven. At the end of the day, all the analyses that we do, that we generate for our stakeholders and end users, all these numbers that we calculate, that's not the point of it. The point of it is to help people make better decisions. And
Yes,
people is the underlying
right.
process. Interpersonal skills like these, communication, presentation, and storytelling, that really is the foundation of the future in any technical industry. I like to believe that technical skills can make you a better worker, but soft skills like presentation and storytelling and communication can make you a better overall well-rounded human being. They apply to not just your professional life, but your personal life as well. If you can be an efficient communicator, an effective communicator, you can persuade people, inspire people, motivate people, and feel more confident about your own communication. So learning these skills is not important just for work, but also for our personal lives and our to feel fulfillment within ourselves and our own confidence.
And what quick question about work in that in data migration work. So data migration is skill, but do you think it will be in the near future not only a skill we need, but also will be like a role related to data communication? Data analysts are like very related to data communication. Data scientists as well. They need to communicate, talk to C-level executive, business audiences. But do you think there will be like a direct or like a role more related to data communication, like a combination of the little bit of data analysis and a little bit of data science with data visualization. What do you think about that?
I actually know a few people in my network that sort of fulfill that role already in an interesting
Really?
way. There's a role, there's a great person in my network that I highly recommend others follow, Mo Villigran, who wrote a book recently called Data Insights Delivered. It talks about the process for effective stakeholder communication. Her role is data concierge is the title, I believe. And what she does is she's a liaison essentially between data teams and the business. She communicates between the two. And I believe that that role will become more and more popular as time goes on, as we realize this gap between data teams and the business is so common, so frequent, so
Yes.
prevalent, yet nobody really knows how to close it. And this person, as a data communicator, as a data concierge,
That
can
answer.
help do that important job of
The-
making sure that everybody understands.
What's the name of a book you mentioned?
It's called Data Insights Delivered, and it's by
Data.
Mo. Yeah, Data Insights Delivered.
Good, good. Christopher, I mean, it's been a pleasure for me to talk to you. Okay, this last 3 4 days. Okay, before we spoke. Okay, I've been like swimming in all the materials, all the videos you publish, and I think that you're addressing a problem, a real problem that we data professionals need to solve, which is how to communicate. And I mean, it's important, but we usually don't pay much attention to this part, and you are doing a great job by training people and uh, actually putting this topic into the headlight something important for people. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. And I mean, is there anything you want to say? Me, you want to invite people again to your network, to your YouTube channel, or invite them to join your webinar? Please invite people to follow you
Yeah,
and
thank
invite
you.
you.
Thank you again for the opportunity, Alan, to be a part of this webinar series. It's a real pleasure and honor to be able to chat with you today. And yeah, I would love to meet more people from the community interested in working on these skills. If this is something that you're interested in, if this is something you want to work on for your personal and professional career, becoming a confident data communicator, then feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always open to receiving messages and seeing how I can best be of help, whether it's through my coaching, my course, my workshops, or any other means. I always want to be of service and provide as much value as I can to the community.
Good. Thank you, thank you again, Christopher, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Alan.